All right, so good morning, everyone. First, I just want to thank everybody for joining in. I know for those on VOCA grants, we've been in trainings all week. So, thank you for staying attentive and joining us. It's going to be a little interactive today. So we just want to say that we appreciate that as well for those who will be sharing. So our presentation is responding to clients in crisis, practical skills for engagement and interviewing. And my name is Caroline Rivera. I'm a paralegal working under a VOCA grant at Philadelphia Legal Assistance.
And I'm Maggie Potter. I'm a social worker at Community Legal Services in the Family Advocacy Unit.
Hello, my name is Saadiqa Kumanyika. I'm also a social worker at Community Legal Services working in the Family Advocacy Unit.
Good morning, I'm Irene Lindsay Brantley, and I am the Program Director at Women in Transition.
Okay, so just to quickly go over what we will be talking about today. We already went over introductions. We're going to talk about what is a crisis, understanding trauma and grief, tips for working with clients in crisis, and how to conduct screenings and trauma-informed interviews.
So I wanted to just go over some PADs or predictions, acknowledgements, and disclaimers. This idea of kind of padding things is a trauma-informed technique that I sometimes use with clients and also in trainings, and just in general, kind of setting expectations can be a trauma-informed practice in itself. It can be helpful for folks who have a trauma history to kind of know what's coming or know the layout of the courtroom or who's going to be in the room or how long I can be on the phone with them. So this padding idea is sort of like just in itself an idea to use with your clients. But so some of the PADs for today's training are studying trauma, grief, and crisis can be traumatizing. It can bring stuff up for people, even if it's something that we're talking about is not directly related to someone's own history, it can still bring up emotions and feelings. So just being aware of that and knowing that that's normal, recognizing that self-care is super important. So taking care of yourself, do what you need to do during this training or after. Also, this is just a small introduction to this field. We have an hour and a half with you all this morning. We could probably spend days talking about these topics, and we know that this is just a little bit, but it can be kind of overwhelming to feel like there's so much information out there about the brain and about trauma and all of this. It's exciting, but it's also can be a little bit overwhelming to know how much is out there, but still worth getting this kind of introductory kind of information to open up that door. And then we also just want to acknowledge the intersectionality of our clients and ourselves, and that trauma and grief and how people experience them can be influenced by their gender, race, class, as well as how they experience the systems of care, diagnosis, and treatment can also be, related to how their identities.
Okay, thank you, Maggie. So before we dive into the presentation, I just want us to take a moment to just acknowledge the fact that we've reached the anniversaries of both the COVID-19 pandemic and the death of George Floyd, two major events that triggered a national crisis, followed by collective grief, mourning, loss, and disorientation. I mean, many of us are starting to feel some disorientation now, especially as we enter this new phase of the pandemic where things are starting to reopen. So just wanted to put that out there and to have us all think a little bit about what that means for us and how we do our work with our clients. Because our interactions with our clients, especially those who are system involved, is really important. It could be a key point of change. It can lead our clients in one direction or another. It can lead them towards feeling isolation, feeling hopelessness, or re-traumatization. Or it can lead them towards a path of inspiration where they want to continue to fight whatever it is that they're fighting. So what does that mean for us? Can you turn to the next slide? So the COVID crisis has allowed us, especially at CLS, to really reflect on how we do our work. We've started asking ourselves, and I'm sure many other agencies as well, we started asking ourselves, what does it mean to do anti-racist work? So are we investing time into the creation of policies, practices, and actions that produce equitable power, access, opportunities, treatment, and outcomes for all? So one thing this moment of crisis has shown us is that normal was never okay for our clients. The pandemic intensified the harsh conditions that many of our clients were already experiencing, such as housing, food, and employment insecurity. Also, George Floyd's murder was re-traumatizing for many Black and Brown communities. His murder was a reminder that Black lives doesn't matter in some senses. It was a reminder of the disposability of Black life. And I say reminder because pre-COVID, Black and Brown communities and poor folks around the country, for them, their interactions with schools, police, landlords, the healthcare system tend to intensify feelings that their life doesn't matter. Another question we've started to ask ourselves, how do we elevate the voices of our clients? So what is it, or are we doing enough to give our clients, to bring our clients to amplify client voice? Are we doing enough to include clients in decision-making when it comes to like policy work, et cetera, or former clients? Are we treating clients as an individual? I mean, a lot of times what I see in my work representing parents that are involved in a child welfare system, when it comes to court, a lot of times the clients aren't even referred to by their names. It's just mom and dad, and the crazy thing about that, and it can be a little dehumanizing. And the crazy thing is that we're referring to them as mom or dad, but we're not really giving them enough resources or support so that they can do whatever it is that they need to do to keep their families together, to really be a mom. How do clients feel about our services? One thing that we're starting to do is we're in the process of putting together a satisfaction survey that we want to distribute to our clients so that we can get feedback from our clients to make sure that we're providing effective and quality services. How do we use our power is another question. How do we share information? What is our role in amplifying those doing anti-racist work? Our agency, well, particularly in our unit, we started a racial justice study group, and where we're learning about, white supremacy, and are investing a lot of time into trying to understand the child welfare system and some of the harms that it causes for families. And, we're trying to come up and think through, like, how can we begin to reimagine a different kind of system that provides more healing and really works towards keeping families together. And we invite different scholars in the field to come and to join us, in different, activist community groups to come to our meetings so that we can really start to think through and what needs to be done to improve some of the conditions that many of our clients experience on a day-to-day basis. And how can we lead anti-racist work? So these are some things that we've been thinking through, and I would encourage all of you to start doing the same. If you haven't, it's not too late. It's really important for us to be having these conversations.
So in talking about crisis, we just talked about our national crisis, our world crisis. So we've got those layers of crises. As service providers, we may come to the table with our own crisis. I mean, we've all, we've experienced some level of grief, even if it's not for a person, for loss of what was normal. So we just want to take a few minutes to think about and have you put in chat how you define a crisis and some examples of a crisis, either involving you and your work or involving our clients. So just take a few minutes, think about that, and we'd appreciate if you put your comments in chat. So it's a big question. So break it down. Thank you. Clients fleeing from their home due to domestic violence. And I can say, because Women in Transition is a domestic violence program, that we have experienced so much because of COVID, where clients were ready to leave. They had a place, they had everything in terms of safety put in place, and then they weren't able to leave because of COVID. People lost jobs. And so therefore that compromised their ability to move forward and into a safe environment. So yes, that's definitely, yes, it can be described differently by everyone. Yes, when a family comes in the shelter with only the clothes on their back, that's a crisis. And it's important for us not to prioritize crisis based on our own situation, that whatever that person is going through in that moment is their crisis, and to support and own that. Parent learning about partner putting child in danger, clients who have lost work, don't have resources to pay, wondering how they're going to make it. So there's that level of concern about health, of family and friends, but also how are we going to make it? Like, how are we even when we get through this for health reasons, how are we going to sustain ourselves beyond that? Feelings about what happened, not being able to think clearly, like this whole year, this last year and several months has challenged all of us in terms of our coping skills. So what may have been a crisis, what may not have been a crisis in 2019 became a crisis in 2020, and then 21. It's now that we're gradually moving forward, we got comfortable in some of those things that we thought were going to be hard to do, that were going to be hard to adjust to. Now we're in another comfort level, and now as we try to get back into what used to be the norm, how do we manage that? That is a crisis for some folks. Returning to work is a crisis for some folks. So thank you all for sharing. We got a lot of good comments. I wasn't able to address all of them, but we got some really good comments. Thank you for being so engaged.
Okay. Thank you everyone for brainstorming together, and we're gonna transition into talking a little bit about trauma. And the theme of this presentation is around kind of around crisis, but kind of within that is sort of the crisis that may be happening to our clients in that moment, may be a trauma in itself, or additionally, the client that we're working with or encountering for the first time on intake or at court may also have a trauma history that they're bringing to the interaction. And so we think it's really important to think about how someone's trauma history might be informing the way that they're showing up in that, moment of crisis that we're meeting them when they're, having to flee from a domestic violence situation, or having their child removed, or, being in the midst of like an eviction or a shelter situation. So to talk a little bit about trauma, I always think it's helpful to kind of go over some of the basics, even if some of this stuff is familiar already. So starting with some definitions. I like both of these definitions when I think about our clients. These both resonated for me. The word trauma is used to describe experiences or situations that are emotionally painful and distressing and that overwhelm people's ability to cope, leaving them feeling powerless, that feeling of powerlessness. Trauma has sometimes been defined in reference to circumstances that are outside the realm of normal human experience. Unfortunately, this definition does not always hold true. For some groups of people, trauma can occur frequently and become part of the common human experience. And that really struck me as I read this in thinking about my clients who are, family parents going through the DHS system. They may be experiencing some type of trauma in that moment, but they certainly have had potentially a childhood history of ACEs or trauma. They may have had a particular crisis that's happening that's, causing them to lose their children, or be at risk of losing their children, but they may have also experienced a variety of different things that have happened to them in their lifetime. And that gets to kind of the next quote of, in addition to terrifying events such as violence and assault, we suggest that relatively subtler and insidious forms of trauma, such as discrimination, racism, oppression, and poverty, are pervasive, and when experienced chronically, have a cumulative impact that can be fundamentally life-altering. And I think that also really resonated with my clients in Philadelphia. There's just a lot of deep poverty. There's a lot of systemic oppression and racism and neighborhood violence and inadequate systems to not enough stable and affordable and high quality housing, problems in the school system. Clients are experiencing these layers and these different types of traumas over their lifetime, and that can have a real cumulative impact. That means that they may not just be experiencing single events, but have this whole kind of layer of trauma. And that kind of also, I think, is helpful to look at like a visual of the kind of trauma iceberg, which this is a great metaphor for a lot of different things, but I always like it for the idea of just remembering that there's a lot below the surface when we encounter someone. I think just even being thoughtful about, we don't need to know that entire history, but still knowing that there is a potential trauma history can help us be more trauma informed when we interact with someone, because we can keep in mind, like, there may be a lot going on here that I'm not seeing or that I don't know about. We may be seeing certain behaviors or hearing the client say something, and it may seem like disproportionate or not what I would have thought someone would react in this way, but it could be that there's just a lot that we don't know. Their whole kind of emotional and relational foundation, which is the sort of larger part of the iceberg, is underwater and not visible to us. But just realizing that can be helpful for being a trauma-informed encounter or practitioner.
If I could interrupt, I'm so sorry. I need to launch the first CLE poll box. So for attorneys on the call, if you would please respond, I will give you about 2 minutes. I will leave it up. You must respond to both questions throughout the session. This is the first of 2. And please feel free to continue. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. This slide about rethinking the iceberg of trauma was shared with me by Saadiqa, and it's this woman, Jen Alexander, who writes this trauma blog that I've liked, I've checked out since then and liked several of her posts. But she wrote about kind of rethinking the iceberg to kind of include oppression and to understand that people are within this kind of larger context. A lot of the times when we talk about trauma, we're thinking about, or at least the way that I was kind of trained in trauma, it's a lot about what happened to that individual or that like kind of individual's history of potential interpersonal interactions or situations, but really remembering that like we need to think about these systemic oppressions. And so she writes, collectively, we, meaning a lot of us, have not adequately been confronting the historical trauma and ongoing marginalization of groups that directly cause trauma and also perpetuate power differentials and systems of oppression, which then make individuals and families even more vulnerable to future traumas. We cannot be trauma informed without fighting these injustices. So it's not just about helping individuals to heal, but also thinking about where systems are failing or being perpetuated by these historical injustices and traumas. And we must go deeper into the iceberg and thus wider with our understanding, asking not just what might have happened to you or what might be happening to you, but also what's contributed to what might have happened or be happening to you, and how might my biases and assumptions be problematic or be getting in the way of seeing that bigger picture of what's impacting folks. Oh, there we go. So then I wanted to just also talk about Bruce Perry is a clinician, and he has done a lot of writing and researching, and he came up with this brain states paradigm, which I think is another sort of helpful framework to think about how trauma impacts the brain. The brain, I'm not a neuroscientist. I definitely am very, very basic understanding of how the brain develops and functions, but we kind of know, it's sort of helpful to know at least a little bit about how that interacts with trauma, because our brain is developing kind of from the bottom up or from the back to the front. And the last thing to develop is our kind of higher order kind of executive functions of like planning and thinking creatively and, being able to kind of process information. And the kind of more like lower sort of structures that come out when we're born or developed really early in life are the kind of survival things like regulating our temperature, our heartbeat, being able to kind of react in that fight, flight, freeze way. And so when we're triggered by trauma, we go into that more reptilian brain. And this little chart is nice because it kind of helps lay out like what that actually might look like for a client. If someone's in, or in anyone, any of us, if we're in a calm state, we can be thinking about the future, we can be thinking abstractly and creatively, we can be utilizing those highest kind of brain functions. But as soon as we start to feel even a little bit of we're on alert, we're starting to be a little bit more concrete in our thinking. We're like, what's going to happen? We're thinking maybe within like the next day or week. And by the time you get down to sort of like fearful, alarmed, terror, you're really getting into kind of like the emotional or reactive or even reflexive kind of survival mode brain. And we're not able to think clearly about the future or be planful or creative in our thinking or even process information or emotions in a way that's how we would normally be able to. And so I think about this, I give the example of like a client of mine, thinking about my clients in court, like they're supposed to be in this ability to kind of, we're expecting them to be able to process information, to listen to what's being said, to understand what the orders are being made. And many of this, a lot of the time my clients walk out and they're in a complete state of high alert and high emotion, and they aren't necessarily processing what happened, or they've been really upset by something that someone said, or just the fact of being in court itself can be triggering depending on their history. So it's important to think about like, maybe I need to have a conversation with that client a day later, or, at that time, focus on just helping them process emotions and process fears, and later come back to thinking about, here's what was ordered, here's what's expected from you in the next few months, here's what, we're going to do to plan to start checking off these boxes of like, you were ordered to do parenting classes, so let's talk about that kind of thing. May not be something that they can actually hear and process at that moment. And how that might manifest for clients in crisis. Their coping strategies that they rely on may or may not have worked for them in the past, but may not work as well in this situation. They may have a harder time understanding and processing their emotional responses. They can have a pervasive sense of loss of control, particularly in our context after the removal of their children. That can be a really huge blow to their sense of control and trust. They may find it difficult to trust, and they may become numb or shut down. And this can also indicate the presence of trauma reminders. There's sort of two different kind of hallmark reactions, which is the like dissociative reaction or the kind of hyper arousal reaction. And so some clients may seem aggressive or, upset or like highly emotive, and others may seem more dissociative and kind of almost like lack of affect. And that can also be interpreted negatively by folks around them when it's like, that's actually a trauma, that's actually an indication of a trauma response as well. Okay, so I'm going to pass it to Saadiqa to talk a little bit about grief and loss.
Thank you, Maggie. So yeah, we're gonna shift to talking about grief and loss. While it's really important to work in a trauma-informed way, it's also important to develop an understanding of grief and loss and how that may impact our clients and our interactions with our clients. So many of our clients are grieving a variety of losses, all kinds of losses. And what do I mean by that? There's different types of losses. There's bereavement loss. This is the most common type of loss that people are familiar with. And that's loss of a family member or a loved one through death. And then there's ambiguous loss, also known as a living loss. So this one may be less familiar to folks. Ambiguous loss is an example of this is a loved one is physically present but psychologically absent. So if you have a family member that is experiencing dementia, that might be difficult for you. It might be difficult for you to be around that individual because they no longer remember you. So that can produce some kind of loss. And then another example, something that Maggie and I encounter a lot in our work, which involves representing parents that are involved in a child welfare system. A lot of our clients are grieving the loss of their children. They might have had a child removed from the home. So the parent may have visits, or they may be able to talk to the child, but the child isn't physically there with them anymore. They're no longer taking care of that child. And in some cases, the parent might lose parental rights. So in that case, their relationship with that child is permanently severed. So they have no idea where that child is, right? So that's another kind of loss. And then there are some subtle or less obvious losses. And something that I see with my clients is that the loss of identity, the identity of being a mother. They know they're the biological parent, but someone else is caring for their child. So what does that mean for them? Am I still the mom? So just wrestling with that can produce, a feeling of loss for them. And then I put move to a new home because what we see happen a lot is if a client has 3 children, for example, and all three children were removed from the home, maybe the parent loses her rights. The mother, if she's in public housing, may have to update her lease. She might have to move to a new unit. So just having to transition in that way is a loss for the parent, just having to go to a completely new place, and just having to sit with the fact that there's no rooms for her children anymore, right? Like that's really hard for many of our parents to sit with. So those are some examples of losses. And then grief. Grief is just is a natural response to losing someone or something. And it's important to keep in mind that everyone grieves differently. And the way people experience grief really varies depending on whether they've experienced a loss in the past, whether it's their first loss or they've had several losses, their coping style, whether they have support systems set up for themselves, whether they experience secondary loss. So like the example that I mentioned before, a client, one of my clients, she lost custody of her children, and then she had to leave her apartment. She had to, because she had to update her lease, et cetera. So that was a secondary loss for her. And that can make the grieving process a bit more intense for those clients. There's also different styles of grieving. You might have someone that's really emotional. They might be that intuitive griever. They cry a lot. And then you might have someone that might not cry at all. They might, just intellectualize the problem. They don't really show any emotion. And then lastly, there's no set time frame for grief. So some people describe grief as like waves, and so at some periods, it may feel more intense than others. They might feel like, this wave is just coming over them and they're getting sucked under this wave. And other days it may feel like the wave just, the water is just kind of brushing across their feet. And that's important to keep in mind because there isn't really an end point when it comes to grief. It's a lifelong thing. And, you know, one of my clients, I'm dealing with a client right now who, when we first got the case, her father, she just lost her father. He died in a car accident. And then like a few weeks later, her children were removed from the home. So that was a lot for her to deal with, of course. And, you know, we try to connect her to different resources, mental health resources. And at a certain point, she seemed to be doing well. She was addressing some of the issues that DHS investigators had identified. And, but then all of a sudden she kind of, you know, disappeared, and I hadn't heard from her for a while. And I finally was able to reach her, and she was just like, I'm depressed. I don't want to do anything. I don't care about this stuff anymore. She just kind of felt like she wanted to give up. So it's important to be able to tell clients that it's normal to feel this way. I mean, you've experienced a lot of losses, and to let them know it's normal, and that feeling depressed is a normal feeling. And then to just make sure that they're, again, getting the resources that they need so that they can accomplish their goals. And in her case, that's getting her children back. So you can go to the next one. And then here we have disenfranchised grief. So grief scholars and practitioners have really emphasized the important role of mourning in the healing process. But when someone's grief or loss is disenfranchised, meaning that loss is hidden, not socially supported, openly acknowledged, or publicly mourned, it's really difficult for them to heal because the traditional avenues and rituals around loss and death aren't really available to them. So this concept is something that I talk about a lot. You know, when I took a grief and loss class a couple of years ago, and this really resonated with me out of everything that we talked about, because it gave me some language to express some of the things that I was feeling as a Black and brown woman. As a Black and brown woman who was doing reentry work, you know, prior to my work with CLS, and just working with incarcerated individuals and communities. And then just even thinking about, in Philadelphia, gun violence is out of control in Philadelphia. And, you know, when someone dies in a community, that impacts the whole community. When we think about, I remember a couple of years ago, I was in Ferguson and kind of stood on that street where Mike Brown died, and where he was murdered. And I just couldn't stop thinking about, because I saw like you know, it was like in a public housing community, and it's just a lot of homes and a lot of little kids running around. And I just kept thinking about the impact that might have had on those communities, and who's speaking to that, right? Like what, you know, so just thinking about that impact and then just kind of connecting that to the reentry work that I did. When someone ends up getting locked up, what does that do to the communities, the loved ones that are left behind? Who's, you know, like it really ends up devastating the community in a lot of ways, because they're taking away, you know, resources from that community, people that could be contributing to that community in meaningful ways. So, and with the mothers that we work with, we end up representing a lot of mothers in the family advocacy unit. You know, because historically, there's this, Black mothers have been devalued historically. I mean, it goes back to slavery, and Black women are often negatively represented in the media. And so when a mother's child is removed, often there isn't really spaces, there isn't that community there to support that mom who's grieving the loss of that child. So those support systems aren't really there to kind of help the mother through that, you know, to help the mother process all that's going on after the child is gone. So I just wanted to put that out there. I wanted to make sure to add this slide in this presentation. here are some examples of disenfranchised grief and loss. A non-death loss, a loss that isn't seen as worthy of grief. The way someone is grieving is stigmatized. So an example of that, the absence of an outward grief response or extreme grief response isn't there. And you can go to the next one. Some more examples: grieving family separation due to foster care, grieving someone who is incarcerated, moving, or the loss of a community, loss of independence. So there, these are some more examples. And you can go to the next one. So some grief reactions you might see. Clients might feel like they're going crazy, might have a difficult time concentrating, feel sad or depressed. I see that a lot. They might be angry, feel frustrated. They might experience anxiety, experience guilt or remorse. They might start feeling numb. I see that a lot too. Or they might lack energy or motivation to do whatever it is, like with the work that I do. Oftentimes the parents that we end up working with are experiencing housing insecurity, unemployment. They might have a mental health issue, and it's like they're usually told, in order to get your child back, you have to address all these things. And they start to feel overwhelmed, and it's just like, this is too much. And again, there's that, they sometimes start to feel like they want to give up. And and as an advocate, we have to be there to kind of push them and encourage them and to remind them that the feelings that they're going through is normal. You're grieving, etc. So I think that's all that we have on grief for now.
Thank you, Saadiqa. And I also just want to, it was pointed out in the chat, but everything you said was so important. And I just want to thank you for sharing all that you did, because it is really important. So thank you. But my name is Caroline, and I'm a paralegal at Philadelphia Legal Assistance. And like I said before, I work under a VOCA grant. And so what I just wanted to talk about is how these things kind of might look in action, and some of the things that we do in our organization to try and best service survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault and other victimizations. So part of my role at Philadelphia Legal Assistance is to help run our family law hotline, where we get our clients. We have other ways too, like our online intake and referrals, but the hotline is the main way that we get our clients. Another part of my role at PLA is to conduct client interviews, no matter what level of service we're going to be providing. Sometimes it's attorney representation, and sometimes it's pro se assistance, which would be drafting or advice given by a paralegal under attorney supervision. But either way, I'm usually having a lot of contact with clients. And for my grant, that also means that whoever I'm talking to most likely has some kind of victimization. So I wanted to talk about those experiences a little bit and some of the safety measures and other ways our office has tried to support survivor safety and trauma-informed care. So best practices for initial contact. Of course, this is a list that is ever changing in our office and is no way a full list of all the things that we can be doing to promote and practice survivor safety. But a lot of the things that we do on our hotline and during client interviews are really a part of a toolkit that you just start to build by actually working with survivors and folks who are experiencing trauma or who have experienced trauma. I think it's also really helpful to try to put yourself in the shoes of someone who is reaching out to your office or organization. When I was training for my role, because I'm a paralegal, so I obviously didn't go to law school, and this was my first role working with survivors of domestic violence. when I was doing that training and learning about custody and protection orders, I was really overwhelmed with all the information that there is to learn, and shocked at some of the things that go on in both systems, dependency and in other parts of family court. So I try to remember that when somebody calls our hotline, that even picking up the phone is a real act of bravery. We did this training last year, and I think that some of the tools and information we share may seem obvious to folks, but survivors who are engaging with so many different systems sometimes, some of these things can be really important. I also just want to acknowledge that, of course, all the different legal aids here have different intake systems, but hopefully what we talk about can be adapted and applied to the work that you do. So first, when somebody calls us, it's important to share your role and organization. Again, this seems very basic, but I was speaking to a client yesterday who is getting assistance from us for custody and is getting assistance from another legal aid for their protection order. They had reached out to them beforehand. And then also because of the abuse that they experienced, there's also a criminal case. So there's a lot going on, and I'm sure that this person is also getting other resources like counseling. So they're talking to a lot of people and probably have a lot of appointments. And so it's important to know who they're speaking to and which organization it is, just so that there's some organization in all of the things that they're going through. Also assessing the safety of the caller. So Amber, who gave a training yesterday and the day prior, and is an attorney at our office, touched on this a little bit, but it's important to speak to clients and ensure that there's a plan on what to do when they are not the ones to answer the phone when you call. During our hotline, we're able to add notes to the phone number section, and we can add things like, this is the mother's phone if the client doesn't have their own phone, or only call during these times, or please text before calling, things like that, just to make clients add that layer of safety. And something that happens more than one might think is coaching. I've had many calls on the hotline where I can hear somebody in the background telling the caller what to say or is answering my questions and I can hear them. And while sometimes this is innocent and it's just a way to assist the person actually calling, it's important to let applicants know that that conversation needs to be private and to explain confidentiality. Also, people call in all kinds of places. So, which makes sense because people prior to calling may not know what information we need to gather, but we ask for pretty personal stuff like social security numbers. Again, we ask about victimization on the hotline. And so it's important to ensure that the person you're speaking to is in a safe and secure space to have that conversation. I also think it's important to notice when clients are being hesitant to answer questions. And for that type of thing, I think it's usually just a gut feeling. I haven't had many of those calls, but I think when you notice that somebody doesn't want to answer your questions, and you start to wonder if that person is in a safe place to follow that feeling. It's good practice to try to issue spot as early as you can. On the hotline, we're asking about financial information, their current housing situation, and immigration status. And depending on how someone answers those questions, you can see how there might be opportunity for referrals or for mentioning other lines of intake that you might know of. Of course, it's not good to overwhelm somebody, and usually it's just like a light mention or a suggestion, but sometimes clients are happy that you do mention it. And then setting realistic expectations is the most important to me. When people call, the first thing that they say is, they need an attorney for their court date. And it's important for me to explain, that representation may not be guaranteed, and to be clear about what I can do for them at that moment, which in that moment, it's just an eligibility screening. And I think it is worth it to explain quickly the process for your office. So that way people have informed consent about the services that they're getting, and they know the timeline of how they're going to get those services. And then like Maggie was touching on, just considering what state the client is in when they're calling. And I'm sure that we've all had those kinds of calls that sometimes clients or applicants call you as soon as whatever the thing is happening. So as soon as they leave a court date, and it may not have went the way it should have. You know, and sometimes people call, they're crying and they're yelling and they're really stressed out. And we could talk more about those types of calls, but I think it's just most important to assess whether that person is in a mind frame to accept any of the information you're able to give them, not to overwhelm them. And it's important to not, of course, match their energy, or, you know, to understand that that person just probably had something traumatic happen to them. And so that's why they're speaking the way that they are. Of course, it's important to sometimes respectfully set a boundary, but you know, to try to understand that and assess that as soon as somebody calls. And we can go forward. And I just want to thank everyone so far for things that they have been writing in the chat. And I was curious to know and hear some thoughts, if folks are comfortable sharing types of phone calls that you have had, or examples of calls that you may have thought were difficult to handle during initial contact, or just calls in general that have been difficult. And I'll just give a minute if people would like to write in the chat. And then while I wait to see if anybody has any thoughts, I just wanted to share that I had a call yesterday on the hotline, and somebody called and they had an upcoming court date, and they were really insisting on having an attorney. And the call wasn't so much difficult, but I can tell that the client sounded really fed up and had like a nervous energy to her. And so, you know, I took time to explain our services, made sure that she understood, you know, the no rep guarantee, and we did eligibility. But I had a little bit of time on the hotline. And so we spent like an extra 5 minutes speaking to each other. And she was able to express to me that the reason that she was so upset is because she was Black and the father was white and the child is biracial. And the father's family had been saying extremely racist comments in front of the child. And so as you can imagine, the pain that causes anyone, but especially a mother, and how traumatizing that can be for both mother and child. And so, you know, no extra service was done at that time, but just to spend a couple minutes actively listening to the client, you know, they were able to express why they had that energy that they did. And I see some people writing in the chat, yeah, clients feeling defeated, stressed out. Yeah, definitely children who are experiencing abuse. Thank you all for sharing. And I think we can go forward. So safety and confidentiality for callers. Of course, it's really important that clients understand confidentiality, not just on hotline, but also during client interviews. I sometimes used to not take time to explicitly say it and kind of describe confidentiality. And then I noticed that before I was asking certain questions, clients were saying, you know, does this stay private before answering? And so that gave me the cue that I wasn't doing my part in ensuring that clients knew that the information that they were giving me was safe, and that it didn't have to leave that client interview if the client didn't choose for it to. Next, just confirm what the information will be gathered for. So we ask about victimizations during client interviews, and sometimes it can be frustrating for the survivor of domestic violence or sexual assault and other victimizations to retell their story without knowing why they are doing so. I know that abuse is one of the custody factors, and it's going to be relevant for the custody case. So whether, even if the survivor doesn't choose to disclose it to court or not, we feel it's important for us to know. But it's important to communicate that to the client. Every time a client retells their story, they are experiencing that trauma again. And so they deserve to know why they're sharing. And again, just making sure all forms of contacting the client is safe. I've had people tell me that the opposing party has hacked their email before and checks their phone. Sometimes they even have apps where they have access to the person's call logs. And so having a text message or an email from a family law paralegal can put clients in a dangerous situation. So it's important to ask. And we can go forward. All right, issue spotting. So I talked about this earlier, but while we cannot do it all, and the boundaries of what we can do are important, if we do have some time, it is nice to let clients know of other resources that are available to them. So we're super lucky in our office to have Elizabeth DeLuce, Liz, who is a social worker at our office and who can find great resources for clients, sometimes even furniture, clothing for when they need it, when they have to move quickly. But for places that don't have a social worker, I just think familiarizing yourself with other legal aids is helpful for clients who may need referrals. I don't know if who's on here, but I've definitely sent referrals to other counties. So you may have seen a letter from me, but we also ask about substance use and mental health because those are things that are important for us to know, again, for the custody case. But it's also important to frame those conversations carefully. I always want clients to know the questions we ask are not to find issues in their case or to judge them, but more so to help clients prepare for how the court might react to whatever they're going through. I think it's important for clients to know that not everyone who they're going to interact with in these systems are going to be trauma informed. And so preparing them a little bit for that is important too. And then lastly, just the problem about asking directly about domestic violence. So more recently, we made a lot of changes to the way we ask about domestic violence and other forms of violence in our screening. We were noticing that when we asked applicants if they were survivors of domestic violence, a lot of people were saying no. And then during the longer interview, they were disclosing so many things that would be defined as abuse, sometimes even horrific physical abuse. And the survivor didn't consider it domestic violence. So we still ask about domestic violence and sexual assault in as sensitive a way as we can. But when applicants say no, we just try and add more questions to see if we can see more of what's going on. So now we ask things like, have you ever been afraid of the other person involved in the case? Have they ever threatened you? Are there concerns over child abuse, child sexual abuse? Has this person ever hit you? Have they ever withheld money from you? And these questions, of course, don't capture everything, but so many more people are saying yes to those questions and getting the resources that they need faster because we have the information that we need upfront. And then just lastly, the whole point of this is just to try to keep the safety of survivors at the forefront and how we can conduct our client interactions in a trauma-informed way. And so when I'm client interviewing, I've learned from watching other paralegals and from other trainings how important it is for the survivor to know how brave they are for all of the legal and non-legal steps that they have made in leaving really scary situations. Like I said earlier, it takes a lot just to pick up the phone and make a call to a hotline. And while every single person who calls us may not have a legal solution for their case, during those client interactions, I just think it's important to affirm and validate the client and the steps that they have made so far. So that is all that I have. I'm now going to pass it to Irene, Lindsay, Brantley from Women in Transition.
All right, thank you, Caroline. So we're going to start talking about environment, and a lot of the things that I'll be talking about are basic, like it's not rocket science. A lot of it is common sense, but you know, you can have common sense, you could know what to do, but when you're in crisis, you could freeze or just have everything that you know go out the window. So it's nice to have the repetition, because that's how most of us learn. So what you hear, you've heard before, but hearing it again can reinforce it. And also lots of times we can know what to do, but we get pulled into the crisis that the client is going through. You ever had that feeling where the client has shared and you go like, what am I gonna do next? Like all that you know suddenly just went out the window. And so that's why we have this really basic conversation about interviewing, starting with your environment. So this first point about your space actually is pre-COVID and post-COVID. So this is your actual office space, your meeting space. You wanted to make the person feel like what they have to say matters. So posters, and in our case, if we talk about domestic violence, posters, information about resources, anything that sends a positive message that this person is not alone, that this happens to other people and that there are resources out there. In terms of client space, so this is more true now because of COVID, it's a safety plan with the client prior to the first contact. Now, lots of our clients are pulled in so many different directions. And so they actually think it's okay to multitask when they're on a call with you. So you can see them moving around, you see other people in the house. You really want a safety plan that this is your time, this is your space. You deserve to be able to communicate with us in a private, safe, and accessible place, and then also come up with an exit plan if for some reason the client determines that an environment is not safe. We have clients that have been creative around their space. We have spoken with clients who are in a closet. We've spoken with clients who are in their car, but they're not driving, but they're in their car. We've spoken with clients in the bathroom. So we leave it up to the client to determine their own safe space, but you want to make sure you safety plan so that the client can be safe. Next, Maggie. Preparation. First of all, learning about the dynamics of the current crisis. And that's part of what, why you're having this training, you're learning, always educating yourself because the dynamics are constantly changing. Be aware that this crisis is just one part of this person's life, of your client's life. It's not who they are. It's not a label. It is something that is happening to them. Be aware of the specific needs and risks that comes with the client's social identity and impact their access to community service. So we mentioned this point earlier about intersectionality, like just to say call 911, it's not going to be a safe and viable option for everybody. So we really want to layer in our knowledge and our connection with the community resources and how that person's social identity may impact their access. Be aware of the inherent power dynamic in the client attorney client paralegal relationship. The client may perceive that you're up here and they're here, and may be uncomfortable with that because it reminds them of the power and control that they're in their own intimate partner relationship. So be aware of that dynamic and that perception. Be aware that the legal system may just be one of many systems. I mean, it was mentioned earlier, clients have stacks and stacks of numbers that they call. They come in with paperwork, trying to remember which agency they're at. So that be aware that if client says, well, which agency are you? that's a valid question because of all the places they may have called. And then, of course, know about, if you're from Philadelphia surrounding areas, know about the resources that are available in Philadelphia. Next slide. Okay, so this is really common sense, but like I said, worth repeating. Eye contact, take your cue from the client. It's not okay for everybody to make eye contact, and it's not necessarily something going on if they don't. It could be a cultural reason why they're not making eye contact. Pay attention and be aware of nonverbal cues. And this will happen more when you're in person, but be aware of that. Don't try to judge, just be aware. Be aware of your own cues, your own nonverbal cues. Check in with them. It's okay to say, are you okay? It's okay. This is a person who's in front of you. So just to check in and say, are you okay? It's humanizing that person. Acknowledge that they could be overwhelmed and may need a break. And it's okay. If you're in the office, I know in our office, tissues, just tissues on the table says, this is okay. If you tear up, it's okay. Here's a tissue, it's okay. A lot of clients may associate crying with weakness or having loss of self-control. And we, especially at Women in Transition, talk about crying as a means to get some layers of trauma off of you. And so the tissues are there to support you, and we wait while you get that out. And this goes into allowing client to vent emotions. Like I said, crying is a release, the tissues. You don't even have to hand them to the client. The fact that they're on the table says that we understand. Next, please, Maggie. Do not assume anything about the client based on their personal appearance or demeanor. Some clients are so put together, and we know there is no look to crisis. Some clients are so put together, you think, what could be wrong? What could be happening? Some clients seem to have like a chip on their shoulder. And that could be they have no control in their lives anywhere else but except this interview with you. All right. So you may perceive that, but ride with it. And because there are many, many different ways that clients could be reacting on the outside that are not the same as what's going on the inside. People process things differently. People learn differently. People move forward differently. So you really want to not make that person feel guilty for taking one step at a time, or even taking the first step. Like really, really, really make them feel that this call that you made, if this is your first call, this is the first time you're sharing this, is a very important step, and thank them for it. Don't make promises you cannot keep. Lots of times we're so busy trying to help, we make promises about another system. Oh, just call them and they'll take care of this for you. We want to be careful not to do that, and careful not to just move this person off of our plate in that way, because we're sending them to a merry-go-round. Next time. Of course, we've all learned this. Listening skills are key. Non-judgmental, reflective listening. So if you're not sure, it's okay to ask, to clarify. I just want to make sure that I heard what you said. I just want to make sure that I get this right so I can provide the best service possible for you. So you can frame it in that way. It's okay if you miss something. I mean, I have been in a situation where I've seen a client and I just drifted off. I mean, the client was talking. I'm a human being. I drifted off, and I was like, oh my God, what did that client just say? And then I said, I just need you to clarify something. Is this what you said? Is this the idea that you're communicating? I just want to make sure I have it right. It's okay to do that, because the person on the other end feels like this person really cares about me. And it's not just going through a form, checking off the response. When you have to ask questions, ask direct questions. You want to ask questions, just like Caroline just mentioned. A lot of clients don't identify with IPV, intimate partner violence, domestic violence. They do identify with words like hurt and harm and fear and stress, those types of things. And so we also ask questions in that way, and that that we accept their answer just as it is. It doesn't have to make sense to us. That's the thing. It does not. We just have to be able to understand clearly what the client said. It's not for us to agree or disagree. And remember, lots of clients, especially domestic violence clients, are used to being not believed, are used to what they're saying being minimized, are used to victim blaming. And so when they can feel like you believe them, you have provided a service beyond what's on your to-do list for that day, because you may be the first person to actually believe them. And as was mentioned earlier, you want to explain confidentiality just in terms of, but just not just the conversation, but your work product, your paperwork. All of that is confidential, so clients can get a better understanding of that. Next slide. Validate. This must be challenging for you. You're doing a great job. You don't deserve to be hurt. You want to avoid criticizing the abusive partner, because depending on where that client is in their healing process, they may actually protect that abusive partner. They may actually get upset with you for saying something demeaning about that abusive partner. So this is about the client that's in front of you. So you don't want to make judgmental statements about the abusive partner. And I mentioned this before, thank them for sharing. Lots of times we're busy, we're doing our work, next client, next client, next client, next client. We need information from them. We assume that they know we need information. They give it to us. Thank them. Thank them for sharing, especially it may be the first time that they've shared the information, especially around domestic violence. Acknowledge your limitations, as well as those of the legal system, because your client may have their perception of the legal system may come from TV, it may come from people who've been telling them different things. It may come from another county, another state, another country. Really acknowledge what the legal system is like here in Philadelphia, in the county that we're working in, and also the expectations, and be clear about your role in this process. I know when working with clients, they'll say, I'm going to see my lawyer, and they act like the lawyer can just check off, check everything that's going on in their lives because I have a lawyer. Really be clear about your role so that you can help the client understand what the expectation is. And even though they have a lawyer, it does not mean that everything is going to go in the way that they expect. Okay. And of course, safety planning. We have the understanding that this is a process, it's not a product. So safety planning could be as simple as planning for the phone call. But it could also be like when we're in the office, it could be planning how to get to the office, or planning if I call you and someone other than you answers the phone, what's our plan? Because hanging up may not be an option. Hanging up may get you in trouble. So let's think about, if I call, is it safe to leave a voicemail? Is it safe to say, what are we going to say? Lots of times we safety plan about, so if I call and someone else other than you answers the phone, in our experience, if you say I'm doing a tampon survey, that usually ends that call right then. That's better than hanging up. And so we safety plan with that client about what we should say. Build on what the client has already been doing. And this is so important. Lots of clients have just gotten in survival mode and don't understand how important it is that they're still here. they're alive, they're healthy, and what they did to contribute to that. Like they're just doing the best they can to live, to get by, to take care of their children. Someone from the outside can say, wow, you have really been doing a lot to keep yourself physically and emotionally safe. Pat yourself on the back about that. You are really resilient, and you will get through this, and those types of affirmations. Understanding the PFA, that it's a tool, yes, but it's just one part of the client's overall safety plan. It's not a guarantee of safety. So go over the safety plan in addition to the PFA. We want to make sure the client doesn't understand that just because they have a PFA that they're all set. There are still other things to consider in an overall safety plan. Thank you. And then one more thing. We who do this work do have some element of power, but we're also powerless. There's that dynamic, because we can't make people do anything. We can't make systems behave the way we want them to. For our own self-care, we have to understand that, because a lot of us can go through and do the best we can. Things just fall apart, don't happen the way we want to, and we wind up blaming ourselves. Could I have done more? Could I have known more? That kind of thing. We have to be able to understand that we don't have a wand that's just going to make everything better for everybody. And as long as we did the best we could for what we know, that is fine. But also be able to say, but could I have done something differently? And that's okay to ask that. That's what makes us better practitioners, is to be able to ask that kind of question in a self-care mode. Because we're not here to fix anybody. We can't fix anybody. And there are some clients who just sort of get to your heart, get up under your skin. You want to take them home. You do want to fix them, and you can't. So to keep that, to remember that, and be honest about what we can and cannot do, and know what your personal boundaries are. There are some cases, because of your background, because of your trauma, or your culture, or whatever, there are some cases that are going to impact you personally. Just hearing about it is going to impact you more. And you, as you do this work, you'll get to know what those cases are. It could have to do with the age of the person, or just the scenario. Really identify that as a part of your own self-care, and notice that personal boundaries. So one of the personal boundaries is to leave it. Well, I could say this before COVID, but leave it in the office. But even in your space at home where you work, at the end of the day, the personal boundary is to leave it there. And then replenish yourself in whatever way works for you. For some people, it's kicking back and just meditating. It's going for a walk. Whatever it is that replenishes you, get in touch with that and do that for your self-care. So because if you love this work and want to continue doing it, you will need to replenish yourself, because this is a lot to absorb on a day-to-day basis. Okay, Maggie. Okay, so having said all that, we're going to do a role play, just so you get a visual on what an interview could look like.
I'm gonna stop sharing and make it so that we can see your faces, and maybe I'll stop my video, and I think Caroline, maybe you and I can turn off our screens. But I also we only have 10 minutes left. So I was gonna propose that maybe we don't do breakout rooms, and maybe we just debrief afterwards, like collectively in the chat. I don't know if other people.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fine.
All right,
Yeah.
Go ahead, take it away.
This is Kelly. If I could just launch a second CLE poll box now, and then you can go ahead with, your role play or whatever you're doing. Attorneys, you need to respond to the second question. I will leave it up for about 2 minutes. And please continue.
Hello, Ms. Jones. This is Saadiqa, the attorney at Community Legal Services. We spoke a week ago.
I'm so glad to be here. I have so much to tell you. They stole my baby. You need to help me get her back.
Well, we'll see. I'm glad I finally reached you. I kept trying to call you for the last week since our paralegal told you we would be able to represent you in this emergency custody hearing today. But I kept getting your voicemail. Now the hearing is in 15 minutes and we don't have much time. Did you get the video hearing link?
Yes, I got it. There's been so much going on. First, he beat me. So I wound up using for the first time in 2 years. Then the baby's coming 3 weeks early. I was so worried to have her early, but the doctor says she's fine. But then, don't you know, the CYS caseworker showed up and says I couldn't even see the baby in the NICU, even though I was still in the hospital. Then they gave the baby to him, and he was granted emergency custody. And now I can't even go home because he's there. I'm afraid of being beat again. I don't know where I'm going or what I'm going to do.
The emergency custody petition the father filed says that your baby was born positive for cocaine. You used cocaine while you were pregnant?
Yeah, but I've been clean so long. I worked so hard. I did rehab. I did outpatient. I did everything. But when he hit me like that while pregnant with her, I didn't know what to do. I was pregnant with our baby and I was afraid he'd hurt the baby.
Ma'am, did you use cocaine the day the baby was born or not?
I did, but it was just the one time I told you. And the CYS lady says, now I need to go to rehab or I won't be able to get my baby. But I don't need rehab. I only used it one time.
Ms. Jones, you need to go in inpatient if you want to get your baby back. You should just do what CYS is telling you to do.
Are you listening to me? It was one time. Whose side are you on anyway?
Ms. Jones, we don't have much time until the hearing. I know. It was one time and you'll never do it again. That's not how this works. Can I tell the judge you'll go inpatient? If you do that, maybe we can argue for a mother baby program at the next hearing after today.
You know what? You don't even care about my side of the story. I'm just going to tell the judge myself they got it all wrong. You aren't helping me at all. Okay, so that was our hasty attorney interview. We were going to do breakout rooms, but because of time, we'll just, if you could put your comments in chat, that would be great. So these are the questions that we would have had in the breakout room.
Yeah, what went wrong with that interview? What did the lawyer do that was effective maybe, or what did the lawyer do that was ineffective? What do you think might have made this interview better, or what could Saadiqa have done or said instead? And what skills that we've talked about or what pieces of today's training might have applied in this case?
I don't know if you'd also like to let people know they can unmute themselves if they want to comment as well, so you don't have to do all the typing. So please feel free to unmute yourselves as well if you want to comment.
Thanks, Nadia.
Thank you.
Let's see.
Yes, for sure, judgmental.
Some of the attorneys' questions came across as judgmental, which causes client to get defensive.
Mm-hmm. Making no effort to reach a solution, like asking for a continuance.
There was no validation of client's concerns. The client wasn't being heard.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. The lawyer sounded like she was judging the client. So yeah, we see there was a lot of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
The lawyer failed to, lawyer failed to establish rapport.
No attempt to empower the client to be part of the process.
So there was some victim blaming or
Yes.
shaming.
Mm-hmm.
For to reach a solution, ask for a continuance.
Were there any ideas about what could have made the interview better, or like what what maybe skills could have been used.
Not so hasty.
So she said, they stole my baby, acknowledge this and take a moment to let her talk about how she's feeling. So that's one thing the lawyer could have done. The lawyer never asked what the client wanted. She could have done some safety planning, especially since the client made it clear she did not feel safe. That's right. Listening could have been a good skill, definitely. Not opening up with blaming the client for not being in touch sooner. And Jamie mentioned, I would start out saying that it was unfortunate we couldn't connect earlier, so we should ask for a continuance to get on the same page and reassess, right? Lawrence mentioned the lawyer can let the client know what the court will likely require without making it sound like that was the lawyer's personal opinion. Lawyer could acknowledge difficulty of the client's situation and unfairness of the situation.
Yeah, a lot of opportunities for like building trust, validating, affirming, letting people vent, as we talked about. There's so many things that identified. Right, and Brendan wrote the attorney has to be realistic, but should also remember that they work for the client, right? The interaction didn't really feel client-centered. Yeah, Brendan also wrote up above that the client may have felt victimized again by the system, by us, the way that we interacted with them, which I think is such a good point.
Yeah.
I think, I don't remember who made earlier, maybe Saadiqa, but just, you know, our interaction with folks can make a real difference for good or for bad.
Yeah.
Right.
And the power play going on, that's that power dynamic that I was talking about earlier. You could really see it clearly.
We only have a couple minutes left. I don't know if there's any final like questions or comments that anybody wants to make. We do have go back and share our contact information for how to get in touch with us or our organizations. But I want to just thank everybody for being here, and I don't know if there's any final thoughts.
Any other final comments or questions from attendees for our presenters today? While you might be typing them up, or if you want to unmute yourselves, you're welcome to. I just want to thank you all for being here with us today. This is, as someone noted in the chat, this is really difficult to talk about and sometimes hear, but it's really important. And it, you know, may seem like common sense, but sometimes, right, we carry some of our clients' trauma and it affects us too. So this is really important. And thank you so much for being here. Thanks to all of our presenters. This is a great session and I really appreciate you being here with us on a Friday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Everyone have a great weekend. Take care of yourselves.